Hi everyone. I'm Aaron Salas. I've also on and off been using Rust for probably about 10 years now. Started getting interested in it really when it reached 1.0 in 2015. So that's when I started thinking, oh, maybe this is a serious thing and not just a something people are playing around with. Had good experiences, bad experiences, mostly good. Um, so I'm the presenter today. Let me share my screen. All right. Let's, hopefully it doesn't auto advance on me. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about dependencies and Rust and cargo, which I guess is responsible for a lot of how it works. I guess this came out of some comments in the last meetup where we're talking about some dependency related challenges, and so I thought we have a bit of an overview. So I'll cover the basics for anybody that's not super familiar, and then talk a little bit about cargo, something called MSRV, the minimum supported Rust version, some useful tools like RustUp, and lastly, I'll talk a little bit about registries and how you can set up your own. But first, let's talk about the basics. So for anybody that's familiar with Rust, I may apologize slightly. Hopefully everybody will learn something, but if not, it'll get everybody on the same page. So first of all, Rust, especially compared to C and C++, which is kind of the languages it largely competes against, working with dependencies is a breeze. You can usually add your dependencies very easily. You can manage your dependency lifecycle much easier than most other static compiled languages, at least that I've worked with. Certainly tooling in many places has gotten a lot better, but I'd consider Cargo and Rust to be pretty best of class, especially for the self-built applications where you're not necessarily pulling a lot of other languages, although it's still pretty good there too. The real basics is that you can use cargo add or cargo remove to either add or remove a dependency from your crate, and this gets saved in your cargo toml. You can also be much more specific with these commands. So you can say, I want to add SERDI exactly 10229 and turn on the derived feature at the same time. So you can add more arguments to these commands. And then once you've done this, you can pretty much immediately start using your dependencies in your code. There's no complicated workspace setup or anything like that. You're generally good to go. And this brings us to the first. There's two main files that have to do with dependencies that you're going to run into. The very first one that everybody sees right away is cargo toml. And this is where your package declares all of your direct dependencies, features that those dependencies require to be turned on, and of course, all the rest of your project configuration. It also declares your minimum supported Rust version for your particular crate, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. And it's really the primary source. So it's the one that the whole cargo tool chain considers to be your design intention for what you want to pull in. This will generally override everything from cargo lock. So if you change something in your cargo toml, your lock will automatically update to follow that. But in the cargo toml, and this is where you start getting into the differences, the versions are loosely declared. Even if you look like you've specified a complete version, it will actually up version your crate's dependencies in order to have something a little bit newer by default if there's no lock file generated. And this is also very useful for when you've got library dependencies that themselves have dependencies, and it needs to figure out which versions of which packages you can use in your own system. Now, there's also a more fine-grained cargo lock mechanism. That this is generated by Cargo. You pretty much should not modify this by hand, but Cargo has a number of tools for working with this. Now, this contains a list of all of your packages, including all transient dependencies in your project, and it locks, hence the name, each one of those packages to an exact version in your project. And then when you want to change those, you should use the tooling to do so. And this means that you can get an exactly reproducible binary every time, at least from a dependency perspective. The thing to know is that Cargo manages your versions differently depending on whether Cargo lock exists. Oh, sorry, we've got, yeah. So as I said, if you don't have a Cargo lock, it will try to guess the exact versions of your dependencies, which is kind of a negotiation between what you put in your Cargo toml and what any of your dependencies have put in their Cargo tomls. So it'll try to find a version that works for your entire project. If it can't find one, it'll give you a nice error message, just like every other Rust tool. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what shows up in these Cargo lock files, they're essentially large lists of these package entries. So I'm showing one for Certi derive, and it contains exact metadata for this particular package. In this case, it's showing you, where it came from. It was downloaded from crates.io. It has an exact checksum for this package. So you know that every time you rebuild this, if you're using the lock, you're going to get exactly the same output. And it further declares what its dependencies are. And so there's a giant list of these typically in most projects. So I said you shouldn't manually edit the Cargo lock file. You can use mostly other Cargo commands to work with this file. Starting by default, Cargo, if the lock file doesn't exist, if you run build, check, test, presumably others, it will generally start by making a lock file. So it'll do all of its checking to see if it can find a version that works for building, testing, etc. your project. And assuming it does, then it will generate this file. There is one major command that you probably use relatively often that does not by default respect lock files, and that's cargo install, which is a little bit annoying because usually used to actually install final binaries, which are the ones that typically you want to make sure are reproducible. Fortunately, you can force it to use lock with the -- locked argument, but that's a gotcha that sometimes people don't know, and so they run cargo install and they kind of assume that you're going to get the exact same thing as somebody else, and unfortunately, you may not. And that's especially annoying when somebody's updated a package somewhere and the newer package doesn't quite work properly, whereas the locked version did. Fortunately, you can update lock files easily with cargo update. And it does pretty much exactly what it sounds like. So if you don't add any other arguments to it, by default, it's going to upgrade all of the packages in your lock file. So it's going to redo that step to look at the versions that are in your cargo toml and then try to negotiate versions so that it can find alignment where all of the packages that you want to pull in will have a version that works for your project. But you can specify specific ones. So if you want to update piecewise, you can do cargo update with a crate argument, and it will specifically look at which of your dependencies you want to update. And you can also tell it exactly what you want to set a particular crate to, if you wish, with the -- precise. The latter two I've mostly used when coming back to a project that is very old and has very old dependencies that are mostly unrelated to each other. And so I have to do work in order to upgrade them. And I can do them one at a time with cargo update rather than running a cargo update command that does all the packages all at once and then having 1,000 build errors that I have to go through. I can update each crate and focus on the documentation for the one crate and just do all of those changes before moving on to the next one. I've also used the cargo update precise to downgrade packages when required. And that's a use case that you can basically only do with precise. There is no cargo downgrade or such command. So if for some reason a new package isn't working for you, but the semver would say that it should be valid for that version, you can use precise to lock it to an older version, which I have occasionally had to do with projects. Especially when there was a bug that was introduced in some particular version that should have been a nice update, but it wasn't. And so I can set it back to something that previously worked, which is quite convenient. A couple recommendations, and so specifically around cargo toml, cargo lock. Of course, for the toml file, you have to declare all of your dependencies. There's not much way around that. But for cargo lock, for a little while, there was an argument about when you should save it, and the predominant advice for a while was basically to save it for just your executables, because they said for your libraries, because cargo doesn't respect the lock file for your library dependencies, it was considered to be kind of useless, and so it was clutter in your repository. However, the consensus for this has kind of changed over the last few years. It's now recommended to save this for both executables and libraries. And the reason why is because your libraries, while they may not be respected when they're used as dependencies, you do have tests, you have doc tests, you have integration that you perhaps want to do, CI/CD, etc. And you want to make sure that when something breaks, it's because your library did something. So you're making your changes to your library. You want to make sure that your upstream dependencies of your library also don't break you in the same way that the executables have a lock file. So the test, build, etc. commands, they will respect the lock file, but when your library is used as a dependency, the downstream package will not respect your lock file. So that still leaves leeway for there to be negotiation in the versions. Yeah, and ideally, you want to set the versions in your log file to cover the cases for your application. This becomes more important in like corporate environments where you're looking for stability, as opposed to hobby projects at home. You may or may not care. You may want to follow the latest and just run cargo update all the time. It's up to you, your use case. But I would generally recommend, if you have something that works, save it in your log file. It makes it much easier to reproduce that later if you ever need to. And you can always go back and look at the history too. If you leave something for a while and you said, well, this worked 6 months ago, it's much easier to reproduce that if you have a log file than it is to come back, realize the world has shifted from underneath your feet, and now it no longer works. And also, there is a cool feature for the Rust package versions. So you can have multiple versions of the same package in the same binary at the same time, which is something you don't see in a lot of compiled languages. There are many languages that support this now, but they tend to be more dynamic languages. But Rust allows you to easily pull in multiple versions for the same thing. Now, there's rules associated with this. It's not quite willy-nilly. It's not if you just put any particular version of a dependency in, it'll just automatically get copied, but it will in some cases. So if you are semver compatible, and there's a reference here that says what semver compatible means, but for the sake of this slide, we could just say if the major version number doesn't change, let's say it's semver compatible. There's a giant list on this reference page. We can go to it at the end. Then the compatible versions, it will try to find usually the newest compatible version that works with every package that's in your workspace, including your dependencies and including the dependencies of those dependencies, etc. So all transient dependencies. Or for versions that are not semver compatible. So if you've got package 1.0 and then some dependency is newer than your main executable, and let's say they depend on 2.0, those are not considered semver compatible. So Cargo by default will no longer try to find a version that works for both, because it assumes that it doesn't, and it will now link in both copies of this package. And I'll just show this quickly. So I've got Semver compatible here. This is a trivial application. And actually, just quickly, is this large enough for people to read?
I think so.
Okay. So again, this is just very simple. It's intended entirely for just demonstration purposes. But I've got a couple dependencies here. So I've got Certi, and I've got Certi JSON. But then I also have this serialized package. Now, the serialized package is a local package. If you haven't seen the syntax before, this maybe is just a good time for a very brief overview. So the TOML format is quite flexible. So if you just have a specific version, you can specify it like this, just version number next to the package name. If you've got more metadata that you need to put in, so in this case, I've got both a version and I want to turn on a feature, you can put it in these curly braces. It's basically just a structured block. And there's quite a few different options for your dependencies, but I think version and features are the most common. And then another one is, especially when you have packages in the same repo, you might publish them separately still, but when you're doing your build, they live in the same repo. You can also specify them via path. So in this case, I just have a local package that maybe I'll just go to. And just to show that this one is also very simple, but I want to highlight that in my first version here, so my top level, I'm using 1.0.22 of Certi, and in this serialized one, I've got 1.0 of 200. And so what happens when you do this? Well, I've got no lock file. So if I do a cargo build, so first of all, you can see it worked, and it actually runs. I've just got a trivial. I've just got some structs, and then the dependent package I'm pulling in here. I'm just pulling in another struct. These are both just trivial structs with a serialized derive on them, and I'm just initializing them and printing them. So to show, and getting a tiny bit ahead of myself, but Cargo has a bunch of other commands that let you take a look at what actually got built into your package. And in particular here, I just want to highlight that Certi, so my top level package was called MSRV compatible. So Certi is, it got 229, and the serialized Certi also got 229. But if I just go back, remember that in the dependency, I put 200, and in my top level, I put 22. And that's because in this case, it negotiated. So it took the 1.0 and said, okay, well, that's fine. They're the same major version number, so that's the 1. The minor is actually also the same in this case, but it would happily update it to a 1.1 if that existed. But this patch version number, I mean, despite the fact that they're quite different, they're considered Semver compatible. So you can absolutely jump from .22 to .200. And it actually found that on crates.io, the current version as of right now is 229. So it said that's Semver compatible with both of those declarations. So I'm going to pull in the that most recent one. And you can see the full tree here too. So the MSRV compatible, there's this Certi, and then the this one had the derive macro turned on. And I think it had the derive macro turned on for this one as well, but it's just showing an abbreviated version.
Quick question on that. Is
Yeah.
229 patch version the latest patch version, or is it somewhat arbitrary that it chose 229?
No, that is actually the latest patch version as of right now. So if I go on crates.io, at least as of earlier today, 229 was the version that was published. Presumably it hasn't been updated since I looked at it. So yes, that's the latest that's been published right now. Okay. and this was Semver compatible. I probably showed you the wrong demo, but it worked for the situation. Okay, so cargo. So cargo's, as I just alluded to with the tree command, cargo's got a bunch of other commands that helps you work with these dependencies. So I already talked about add and update, and tree is very useful just to go back to it here. So this, regardless of how large your project is, it will show you the dependencies starting with the top level package, and it obviously shows you in the file system where this is located and what the version is, but then the entire tree of dependencies through here. So you can find, in this case, it's all of my Surdy dependencies, regardless of where they sit in the tree. So Surdy is a direct dependency of my package. Surdy core is a dependency of Surdy. Surdy derive is also a dependency of Surdy. This turned on because I had the feature turned on, which this doesn't show, but that's why it's there. And it gives you a little bit of information. So proc macro crates are also special. So if you have procedural macros defined in a crate, they have to be in their own crate. I think that's still the rule. And so Surdy derive, that's why it's separate from Surdy or Surdy core, is it gives you those really nice, derive serialized type proc macros. Okay. And the last one that I wanted to mention that I've never personally used it, but there are some good use cases for it, is cargo vendor. Where cargo vendor comes into play is, again, when you've got dependencies and you want to make sure that no matter what, your dependency doesn't change. You're not going to lose it. For a little while, there was a bit of an issue on Crates.io with people yanking crate versions because they just didn't want people to use them, not because there was a major problem with them. That fortunately has died down, and most people don't do that anymore. They yank them only when there's either serious problems or there's security issues or something like that. But cargo vendor just automatically goes. I can actually just show it in this case. What it does is it takes all of your dependencies and it downloads them, and it just puts them in a vendor subfolder. And this is the raw source as downloaded from Crates.io for each one of the dependencies in this particular package. So this is quite useful if you just want to make sure this will stay the same forever and you don't want to be dependent on downloading these repeatedly. I might suggest that a better use case than Crates.io, which tends to be up most of the time, might be certain source code hosting sites that famously have had a lot of issues lately. And so if you have it locally, you never need to download it. You do, however, in order to use these vendored sources, so the tool spits out this block of text at the end, but you have to tell your project, you have to tell Cargo specifically for your project that you want to use these vendored sources, because it does not by default pull these in. So you have to add these to, or possibly create a cargo config toml in this particular project's directory and paste these lines for the source Crates.io. And it basically says replace these guys with the vendored versions here. And it tells you what directory to go search for those. So these are built into Cargo itself, so you don't have to download any other tools for these. These are always available to you. I'd say 90% of the time, I'm probably using Cargo Update in mature projects with the occasional Cargo add and then Cargo tree just to make sure that nothing funny is happening, especially when my binary becomes larger than I think it should be, because one case for that, or one cause of that, is when I have different versions that they are mismatched. And so Cargo has been very helpful and copied both in. That may not be desirable in my case. I may want to have a smaller binary, so I can go inspect that, find the multiple copies, and then align them. Okay, so in your Cargo toml, you can specify dependencies in a few different ways. So the basic one, and really this is the recommended one, you have your dependency name, you say equals some version number. And as I mentioned before, these two are considered suggestions, but in such a way that they're like a minimum version. So your dependency will be guaranteed to at least be 1.2.3, but it may be 1.3, it may be 1.50. Yeah, as I put here, with this declaration, 1.9999999, whatever, that is fine. The specific rule is that it's the first digit that's non-zero that it starts counting. So of course in crates.io, you can find a lot of crates where they start with a leading zero. So there's still 0 dot something for their version. When that happens, the breaking change version is actually the first from the left non-zero one. So in a 0.57, the .5 is considered the breaking change. So .5.8 is okay, .5.50 is okay, but 0.6 is considered a breaking change. That's the threshold where Cargo will pull in the new package version rather than trying to negotiate one. As a couple ways you can configure these so that you can be a little bit more specific about what you want if you don't want the default behavior. I'll just show the caret first. The caret no longer does anything. It was the specifier that would make packages work the way that I just described. It used to be that if you passed a full version number, that it would kind of lock it to that version number. That's been replaced with an equals sign. So it no longer does that. And these two cases now work the same. But you can use a tilde as the starting character. And this basically moves the breaking version that it cares about one of the version specifier places. So essentially by default in most cases, it means that this middle number is now the barrier that it will stop at. It still won't copy new versions in if it's 1.3, I think, but it'll stop there. It'll say, if I had 1.2.3 with a tilde, 1.3.0 would be too high for this dependency. And that's the same for both the triple number and the double number. But if you put just one number, then it is still just anything less than the next number. So 2.0. There's a wildcard. Does what you think. Don't use it. It's there if you ever see it. Crates.io will actively disallow you from uploading any package that uses this. So it can be useful for initial development, but pretty much that's it. Yeah, just don't use it. And you can specify exact versions in your cargo toml if required with the equals at the beginning of the string. I would recommend not to use this again unless you really know that you need to, because there's no leniency. So when Cargo tries to figure out which versions will work for your package, if you have one of these equals, that you're locking it to specifically this version. So if somebody uses the other, a different version of this dependency, it'll never work, and you'll always get failures. So the recommendation is to use the default way, but so all these other methods also work. You may also not know, or it'd be useful to know, that you can specify different types of dependencies for your project. And the syntax for each of these is the same, so I haven't repeated them here. But the default block is dependencies. These are things that your application uses or your library uses, and that shows up in your final code. But there's also a dev dependencies category. So if you put dependencies in your dev dependencies, these are not intended to be used in your regular crate, but are used for your test examples, benchmarks, documentation, things like that. So dependencies shown in here are not included in the dependencies list, which means you save a little bit of time with a regular compile. But for tests, etc., they will be included. Build dependencies is kind of similar. It's dependencies that need to go in before your package even builds. So these are generally just dependencies your build RS script. Mostly when you've got extra, generators or something that you want to run as part of your build. And each one of these is a large set of options. So you can take a look at this link here to see all of them. Yeah, so vendoring, I already mentioned briefly, but so you can vendor your dependencies locally in your same repo. The one thing I didn't necessarily mention was that when you do this, those dependencies are considered basically read-only. You shouldn't modify the source code that you find in there. If you do need to modify the source code in there because you're going to mess up the hashes, you need to also add in your cargo toml. So this is not in that cargo configuration file. This is in your regular cargo toml. Add a patch section. So if you're a patch section, it'll be just patch, and then the registry that it comes from, crates.io, is basically the default and where most things come from. So it'll look like this. And then whatever your dependency name is and the path to your vendored crate. At this point, you've registered it as a different patched version of that dependency. So you need to add this extra line in. Okay. So next I want to talk a little bit about MSRVs, or the minimum supported Rust versions. Now this mostly affects working with older compilers, which as a hobby project, you can almost always go to the latest compiler. It's usually not an issue. But there are a bunch of places where you can't necessarily use the latest one, and that can occasionally be challenging. In particular, enterprise environments, or just anywhere where you don't control the computer. So maybe your IT department controls what tools are installed. Another one is maybe you're an open source maintainer and you're submitting into one of the many Linux distributions, and they have a policy that says you have to use the package compilers to build the tools that show up in that Linux distribution. And maybe the packager for the Linux compiler is not up to date. They're a little bit behind, and so they're not using your preferred latest version. Legacy systems, of course, but also embedded, which tend to have extra testing and patching on the compilers. So especially niche architectures might require particular compiler versions, especially if you're working with embedded stuff. I've found sometimes they're basically pinned to specific compiler versions, and then also high security environments. So they may use audited versions. There's the Ferrocene compiler, for example, which is basically an audited version of the Rust compiler. And when you're using those, you obviously, because the Rust compiler, every time you have new versions, they add features, or they fix bugs, or they stabilize traits, or all kinds of stuff. And so most packages have a minimum supported Rust compiler version, meaning you need at least that version of the compiler for your package to build. Otherwise, you're going to fail because that trait doesn't exist in the older compiler, or there's a feature that you've used that was newly added to the language. And you can specify this in your cargo toml, and I highly suggest everybody does. Please do this, in fact, because if you ever work with an older compiler, an older package, it very much helps to know whether something is going to work for you, or if you need to go an older version of that package in order to use it. So I've got a typo here, but the way that you specify it is you put a Rust version, and this is the version of the Rust compiler now, and that is your MSRV. But the obvious question that comes to my mind is, okay, I just told you should put a minimum version for your compiler, but what actually is the minimum version? And of course, this changes all the time if you've added new crates or you ran cargo update. How do you actually know what this is, as opposed to just guessing? And the answer is that somebody made a really nice plugin called Cargo MSRV that, well, it does exactly that. It helps you manage this MSRV version. you can install this with cargo install. And again, remember the locked. But it's got a number of commands to help you find what your MSRV actually is for this package. So I'll just demo that very quickly here. So what does this look like? So I've got a package. Again, it's pretty simple. What's in this package mostly doesn't even really matter. It's just I've got a particular package. I've got some dependency. So as soon as you get dependencies, it starts, the question comes into play of what's my minimum version with my set of dependencies. And so the first command here is find, and this basically just walks through a set of dependencies. It tries to be relatively smart, but it'll typically do a few compile steps to try to figure out what versions you support. And so you can see it tried using a bisect method, even though it kind of looks like it just went linearly here. And it determined that the minimum version for this project is 185. So if I do cargo build, just to show that this actually works in the first place. So it works with this, but if I try doing 1.84, okay, so here's actually a syntax that maybe I should introduce if you haven't seen this before. Sorry, that's kind of at the edge of the screen here. So you can put additional arguments to cargo that tell you which tool chain you want to use by adding a plus sign and then a specifier. So in this case, I've just got 1.84, which means I want to use 1.84 version of the compiler. But there's also, like, you can do like nightly, or you can do versions nightly. But I'm going to do 1.84, which I happen to have downloaded. So this may or may not work for you if you were to just check out this repo and try running this command. And the reason is that you can have multiple versions of the compiler installed at once. And as the MSRV tool determined, this fails when I try to use 184. And I mean, the reason here is very simple. I'm using the 2024 edition, which it declares as a feature here. But basically, I've said in this cargo toml that I'm using edition 2024, and it turns out 1.85 is the first compiler release that supports that version. So that one's fairly straightforward, but that works for any feature because it determines this version by attempting to compile. So if for any reason the compile doesn't work, it'll be able to determine that the version doesn't match. You can do, if you're trying to target a particular version, meaning that let's say you know that you want to run on a particular compiler version. Like, let's say your IT environment has said you've got some ancient version of Rust. Maybe I'll pick 1.59 as an example. Totally arbitrary, I promise you. So 1.59 is what you have available, and you just want to know, like, I've run my MSRV find. How come it's, what did we say? It was 185. So it said 1.85. Why is that the case? Because you just get a compile failure. The cargo MSRV list will tell you what all of your dependency MSRVs are. So in this case, I can see that none of these MSRVs are newer than the value that I got. So the MSRV, it's actually blank here. That's because I haven't specified it in my cargo toml. But in that case, it's going to tell me that my own package is the problem here. If I make changes to my package to figure out, why a particular feature or something, maybe I change my edition to, 2018 or even 2015 to try to get an older supported version. then I would still be locked at 1.71. And so I'd say, why am I locked at 1.71? Well, the answer is shown to you by the cargo MSRV list. So then I could reevaluate, do I really need SERDI derive, which is the primary feature that I turned on here. Because if I go back to just SERDI, I can go back to 156, which is supported in my totally arbitrarily picked version of 1.59. And that is a real challenge that I have experienced before. So this one is blank, and there was nothing in my cargo toml, so I could, write this by hand. But I can also do cargo MSRV set, and we found it was 1.5.1, and this will just automatically set it to my cargo toml. So you'll notice it just edited it to add it there. And you'll notice it now shows up in my MSRV list. Now, why wouldn't I just write this in my cargo toml by hand? Well, the answer is that you can hook this into CI/CD. Again, if you're thinking a bit more of a corporate environment, or even GitHub, using GitHub Actions, maybe you want to make sure that, like, maybe you've got a popular crate like SERDI, and you want to make sure that it stays available for many different versions. You want to make sure you don't break that. Your regular tests aren't going to find that. You could try always compiling with the older compiler, and that's often fine. But newer compilers also have better error messages and better linting and better, all kinds of things. And so you would actually like to have those newer features while at the same time making sure you're, breaking people on older versions. And this is how you would do that. You could do MSRV checks on your CI/CD runs to make sure you don't go over a specific value. On the other hand, maybe you want to set it every time, in which case you could do the opposite, and you could have this update every time you make a submission. Actually, there's one more thing that I wanted to show. And I've had to do this by hand before this MSRV tool. Oops. I could spell. I just want to show that, Crates.io does actually expose this information on the page too. So you probably never paid attention to it. Certainly I didn't until I actually needed it at some point. But by default, it shows you this as part of the primary block. And even more convenient, if this isn't a version that is supported, like if I went to some other package where I had a brand new compiler and I still needed to target some old version, the versions page now shows it underneath the author name for every package. But I asked people, please set this. And the reason is because if you don't, if we go back in history, so SERDI has been good for a long time. But yeah, so if I go back to an old enough version, you'll notice it disappears. And so if you don't set it, they don't guess, and Crates.io does not automatically try to figure out what the version is. So before SERDI version 1.0.131, it's best guess. And so if you have to target an older compiler version, you then have to go do it by hand and try to set your versions and see which one works. And so you'll do a whole bunch of those cargo update SERDI version 1.0.111. And if that doesn't work, you go to some other version, 96, and you keep going back until finally your build works again. It's not fun. So please set your MSRVs. There's possibly some poor person out there that will thank you for it. Rust Up. So Rust Up, if you go to the Rust website, is the default way that they recommend for starting to get going with Rust. And the reason is because it's very nice and easy for you to work with different versions of the Rust toolchains if you ever need to, including cross-compiling, but that's kind of beyond the scope of this talk. And you can install specific versions. So if you want to go test stuff yourself, you can do that. And I ran a command that looked very similar to this with the version 1.80 specifier, but you can install a whole bunch of tool chains. So Rest Up toolchain list will show you all the ones that, in this case, I have installed. So, I've got stable and I've got nightly. I also have one from 2025 that I don't remember why I had that, but I specifically pegged this version, probably for one of my embedded projects. And these versions were all downloaded by MSRV automatically. So if they use too much space, you can also use Rest Up to delete these. And this was all, the ESP one was also for an embedded project that I did. And you can install many different versions if you wish. If you need a specific version, another thing you can do is in your crate, you can put a Rust Up toolchain toml. This is not a hidden file. This just like sits alongside your cargo toml with a toolchain section in here. And you copy the full name for your toolchain that you want. Rust Up also allows you to specify a list of components. So by default, I think it includes everything, which also includes all the documentation for that version, etc. You may not want that. So Rust format and Clippy are common optional components, and you can just kind of limit it to that and not download all the documentation as well. That'll speed up your download time significantly. If you need an alternate target format, like if you're one of these folks working with WASM, you may have seen this before in the form of a WASM target. And profile minimal just tells you a little bit more about how much needs to be downloaded if you don't have it. So Rust Up will be able to just download only the core components that are needed, not a bunch of the extra stuff. And finally, this will be the last section of the talk, registries. So, everybody knows Crates.io. And Crates.io is great. It has great uptime. It's got many packages on there, everything from, very popular stuff like Certi down to, some test thing that somebody uploaded once and forgot about that was basically the whole world. They don't mostly remove packages with some exceptions. And it's great, but it's not suitable for everything necessarily. In particular, especially of experimental or proprietary code that you either can't for intellectual property reasons, or maybe it's just not ready yet, so you don't want to upload it somewhere external, and you still want to have a place to put it because you still want to maybe work with some other folks in maybe your company, and you want to be able to pull these down but not upload it to Crates.io. So what do you do? Well, the good news is that there is a registry specification. So on the Cargo website, there's a specification for the protocols that need to be followed to be a registry, but that is all open, and so there's actually a whole bunch of options. I've just pasted 3 here. One from Cloudflare that's I think fairly common. And Kellner is one that I found played around just a tiny bit with, but I can't really recommend any of these because I haven't used them in depth. But there are many options out there. You can just search for Rust registries or Rust alternate registries. And just give you a demo of what these look like. So I just wanted to demo Kellner, which is a very small, suitable for a local installation. So I've actually just got it running on this machine. And the way that you add this registry is in your global config now. So this is just representing my user folder. So in my .cargo config, and you can create this file if it doesn't exist. So there is a registries list, and you don't have to put Crates.io in here. That's built in. It's always there, no matter if you have this registry or not. But you can add a registries list, and you can add as many items here as you want. So in this case, I've just added a local demo, and you put a URL here, the URL is specific to whatever your launch is. So in Kellner's specific case, the path part of the URL is just API v1 crates. And that goes along with this sparse plus HTTP. You'll notice most of them say sparse these days. The reason is because they changed the format that Cargo uses for pulling down the indices. It used to basically be like a bunch of files in a Git repository. That worked really well for them for quite a long time, but eventually it got so big that crates.io would take quite a while to do an update. So they've changed this to a separate new protocol that they call the sparse registry. And so you just specify sparse plus whatever your protocol is here. And if you're in an environment where you want to make sure that you're not accidentally going external, again, maybe it's a high security environment or something else, you can also specify your default registry as something other than crates.io. So that can be very useful to do. To give an example, so I just have Kellner running in the background. I try to make that a little bit larger. They all kind of work sort of like crates.io from what I've seen. So you get a list. In this case, you've got a list of crates. I've just uploaded that demo serialized crate to this particular instance, and similar to crates.io, it gives you some metadata around it, and you can specifically request these with you can specifically request, let me end up a new one. So the package was called, where did it go? Package was called serialize, and the version is 010. So I'll just be explicit about that. And you can add a registry argument. So you can say, where do I want this to come from? So in my configuration file, I just called it local demo. And you can see it downloaded this from my local demo, which is great. And it does tell you, so local demo index, if I were to do add 30, oops. Oh, I changed the default as well. But if I can spell, I can change it back to crates.io. Just because of syntax issues, they don't use the dot. It's crates-io and all of the config stuff. But you can also see it updated the crates.io index. So that your commands will tell you where these things are coming from as well. Yeah, it's funny. It actually updated both indices in this case. So it might actually update all of your registries at the same time by default. And yeah, Kellner is written in Rust, so it's has the very complicated steps of you do cargo install and then you do cargo start, and you tell which directory you want to store all this stuff in. And that's it. Hopefully it was interesting, and hopefully you learned something. Yeah, so we'll open it up to questions.
Oh.
That the locked functionality, I think there's a huge discussion about it in a GitHub issue, I think, and it just feels like a bad decision to me that it has that. I don't know if they changed it at some point where or I think you may have actually said this, where everything you had to be explicit about specifying locked, and then they changed it so it was only on cargo install. You didn't have to specify it. And that just kind of feels like a major misstep there. I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, I know there's I think I know what they were thinking. They're trying to be helpful, but at least from a security standpoint, it just feels completely the opposite of what you want. But it is what it is.
Yeah, I agree with that. It would be very nice if cargo install by default used the lock file, but especially because you can only use it to install executables, so you can't use it for libraries anyways. Which otherwise, the recommendation for executables is always to have a lock file. But then why do you say always have a lock file for executables, but then the default tool that works with executables doesn't use it by default? Seems like a weird.
I have an opinion. I don't know if that's the reason, but in my opinion, it actually makes sense because you cannot guarantee that the author will keep on updating the executable when nothing quote unquote has changed. Whereas you might want to pull in the security updates when you're doing a new install. But if the install fails, which is usually the failure case where you then know that something's wrong, then you add the locked and you install the locked version. Which is what I normally do. I don't normally install the locked version unless the default fails, which it's failed on me probably twice in my lifetime. I've installed lots of things using cargo install, and generally it just works, you know. But yeah, I can appreciate that you do want to use the locked version if, for example, there was a non-Semver compatible change that was made, but it looked Semver compatible to the author of the library, and well, that breaks your stuff.
Yeah, that's a good counterpoint. If you don't use locked, then it means that minor updates, bug fixes, etc., might move to those applications by default. I guess it depends on what things you're prioritizing.
I feel like most READMEs, like whenever I install something with cargo install, they usually tell you -- locked in their README. So
yeah, because people come back to them and say it's broken, so they don't want the problem.
Yeah, certainly from a maintainer's point of view, it might be kind of annoying if people are bugging you that your package is broken when you're like, no, I just haven't touched it in a while. If you use the versions of stuff that I was using last time I touched it, it worked. Yeah.
I have some kind of beginner questions, but when you ran cargo tree, I saw some kind of ended with the asterisks. Just wondering what that means.
You want me to try to take that one?
Sure, if you want to. I think it just means
so. It means that there are features enabled for that particular crate, and the features are omitted for space purposes. You'd have to tell it that you want to see the features. I don't remember how to tell it, but there's an option to make it show the features.
I see. So like the tree would be expanded. But...
yeah, it gets wider because some of them have like a lot of features, and one of the flags will enable showing the features.
It's edges, I think. Yeah.
edges.
Yeah, maybe edges. That looks like the one.
Something like that.
Below to the feature selection.
Even more.
There we go. So it said there was an all. You could limit it to all normal build dev blah blah blah. But if you do all, then yeah, that makes
It's still hiding a few.
No, it's showing it for all, but it don't show the first time. So if it shows the same crate more than once, the second time so have stars.
Okay.
I see.
When you did the cargo MSRV find demonstration, and you said like it was 1.85, but when you did cargo list, the dependencies showed things that weren't 1.85. Why was the package ended up being 1.85?
The Rust, like why was it set to 1.85?
Yeah, because it looked like the dependencies was like 1.71 and 1.56. So why does it kind of end up being 1.85? It's just
so in this case, the 1.85 is coming from the fact that this package. So if it's a beginner question, you may or may not be familiar with additions. So additions are Rust solution to things that are source level breaking changes, but not necessarily ABI level breaking changes. So they want to make slow changes to the language, but there's no reason why the binaries can't be linked together. but you want to have maybe source code. So that could include like you've got a new keyword argument or something, or not a keyword, a Rust reserved word, and that would potentially be a source code level breaking change, and you want people to either be able to opt into it when they upgrade, but it doesn't matter that from a source code perspective it's different. So they have this addition system to try to resolve that. So you basically kind of choose the feature set, and they're always dates. So this became 185 because the top level one is set to this edition 24, which was included in yeah. So if I were to, sorry, that's going to be really small, but I'm just going to change that to 2018. So now I changed it to 2018. Now I actually don't have to change this Rust version. I can do this find, and it will still go and figure this out. Now you'll notice that immediately it went back much further. The first time I ran this, it basically started at what was almost the current version and kind of worked backwards. It started at 190 something and kind of went back. Now this time it went as far back as 164. And the reason for this is because now I've changed this edition argument. So it just already knows which editions are supported by which versions. And so because I chose an older edition, it's now looking at a much wider range. But you can also see that it's more obviously doing a bisect. So it did 64, then it did 81. Now it's doing 89. So there's still something.
So it's possible that something you're using in your crate is a feature that was added in 80, the new edition, like one of the newer compilers.
Yeah, it's possible.
Well, according to this, let's see. Oh, your package says it supports 185.
Oh, that's probably it. Yeah. So I may be wrong saying that it didn't matter.
Yeah, you need to do it your log file to do it to work. Does it do it for you automatically?
Well, I'm not changing the versions of the actual package.
No, so it said that the prompt failed for 164. Is that the log file version is too new for that compiler?
Yeah, so there are log file versions. This is part of, like, there are potentially issues around that. This is log file version 4. They have changed the metadata a couple times, 4 times. But I mean, a newer one will by default not try to read an older one. Yeah, so in this case now it's the lock file that's causing the issue. If I were to possibly delete that, it might kind of work. Or if I do,
Yeah, I should be able to just delete it. It should work.
Oh, this is lock version 4 again. Yeah, so it's going to create the lock version. What's my oldest? 164.
Well, it would have had to install it to do the cargo find. So when you did cargo find, it would have installed 164 if you didn't have it.
Yeah, you're right. It says downloading 6 components. Am I connected to Wi-Fi? In theory. I'm talking to you guys.
Yeah, well, I was like, wait, huh?
That does require internet.
Okay. Slowly. This might be too slow to go through, but
Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, I kind of need to jump in here for a bit because we need to do the door prize.
Okay. That's perfect time. Let's do the door prize. I'll stop sharing, and then we can come back to it.
I wonder if I can
Later.
share my screen.
Oh, thanks for presenting today, Aaron. That was great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks a
thank
lot.
you.
Yeah, thank-
I learned a lot more than I expected. I mean, I guess I expected to learn something, but it was a lot.
Is this share within a share?
Share this window. That should work, I think.
Yeah, that works.
Am I being
It
list?
was working. It's working now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I changed to my phone.
I think I'm missing a few people. I haven't added Pavan. Can I get your names as well?
My name's Curtis.
Okay, Curtis and
Tony.
Tommy.
Yeah.
Tommy.
I would ask Bunbury. I don't know if he wants to be in again because I suspect he doesn't. Because he said last time to leave him out, so I don't know.
You can take me out, yeah.
All
'Cause
right.
I've still got the.
I think we have Kevin as well. All right.
You can take me out as well.
Oh, don't want to be in this? All right, cool. All right, so this is the list. Does anyone I missed, or does anyone who doesn't want to be part of
Yeah.
this?
Before we shuffle.
Speak now before I click the button. It's a 1 year subscription to
JetBrains one.
any JetBrains IDE.
Okay.
And if you don't want the license key, you can just give it to someone else.
I see no reason not to be a part of this.
I mean,
Well, I don't want to be part of it because I don't need it. So if I'm an example of somebody that and Bunbury already wants. So, that valid reasons.
Yeah, I've
You
already
can
got
always
rushed
recap.
over. So
but sure, yeah. If you really don't want to be part of it, you don't have to be part of it. All right, I'm clicking the button.
Yay!
Nice.
Yeah.
Yay.
So yeah, I will contact you afterwards. Are you in our Discord server? I don't know if
Yes,
you are.
I'm Cookie Bunny.
You're Cookie Bunny. Okay, that's what I thought. But just had to be sure. Okay. Yeah, I will DM you the license after this. Hopefully I get to it tonight. If I don't, then I'll try to remember to get it done by the end of the week. You can always just ping me if I forget. But yeah. Yeah, congratulations. You won the raffle for today.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's everything I want to talk about here. Is there anything else, Aaron?
Yeah. Any more questions or?
Small addition. If you don't want duplicates in your binary, duplicate libraries, you can use cargo deny to automatically check for you when you get a duplicate added, so that you can automatically flag it in CI, so you don't have to keep on checking manually.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point.
Is there a cargo command that shows the features that are packaged up with a crate? I noticed cargo add showed the list of features, but I hadn't.
Cargo tree does it for sure. I don't remember exactly what flagging to use, but I know for sure it does it because I had to use it to debug why a feature was on, because that feature being on was a problem for me. I can't remember what the feature was, but I remember struggling for a long time until I figured it out, and then I had to go back through. It was one of my transit. So features are additive. So once one of your transitive dependencies enables it, it's enabled for you as well. And then yeah, that was my problem.
Right. Is it possible to looking though for something where you might say cargo, features in CERTI, for example, to list all the features that are available in CERTI, even if they're not turned on yet?
Add should do it just fine, even if
Yeah, I just use add for that. I just do cargo add again. It
So
doesn't
cargo
change
add-
anything. It just
Yeah.
shows them.
Yeah.
Unless they're too long. I think after it passes something like 20 or 25, something like that, then it stops showing it and just puts like dots. And then you can just get it on crits.io. Crits.io will show all of them.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Just since everything can just be on crates.io, the crates.io stuff, it shouldn't it not be, should you be wary of downloading stuff from there at all?
Yes.
Well, it's like anything. So, I mean, anybody can upload anything they want. And there are a few typo squatters that, like there's a random number generator package called RAND, which is very well used. Lots of people use it. But somebody has typo squatted RNG, which I have typed by accident, wanting a random number generator. It's one of these like stuck at 0.1 versions. As far as I know, there's nothing malicious in there, but anybody can upload stuff. And so you do want to be a little bit careful. You're probably okay if something's like a really popular package, but I'm not sure that's any specific issue to do with Rust and crates.io. It's just the fact of public repositories. Same with GitHub. Like famous repositories are probably fine to download and run from GitHub, but somebody's weird fork of something or otherwise unpopular, it's probably received less checking, and you want to be a bit more careful.
And I did check out RNG and it looks safe. It has 9 lines of code.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't looked into it, but I've seen that it's there, and I was like, no, that's not the package I wanted.
It uses our RAND.
Okay.
Wow.
Great. And is RAND safe?
There's no way to know for sure, right? It's a really big package. But for the most part, I would think so, because it's used in a lot of security context, and you have people like Amazon using it. So there are a lot of people actively looking at it for problems. And then there is a vulnerabilities registry that's maintained that you can check with Cargo Deny. You can check it manually as well, but you could also just check it with Cargo Deny or Cargo Audit to see if any of the packages you're using have any vulnerabilities to the version that you're using.
Yeah, and I think that I said they mostly don't remove packages from crates.io, but I think malicious packages is one of those exceptions. So if you find something, you can report it to them and they'll investigate. And if they find that it is malicious, they'll either fully remove it or they might possibly lock that and yank all the versions. So it's
I think they remove malicious ones. They might, I don't know, for squatters they might lock, but for vulnerable ones, I think not vulnerable, malicious ones, I think they do remove them.
Yeah, I think for regular squatters they just leave them there, but malicious.
Well, depends. If they do something suspicious, then that's different. But if they're just squatting, then no, they don't have a thing on that, because they had the whole argument about namespaces.
Right. Yeah. It's too bad they don't have, but
yeah, that was a big long argument.
it is what it is. I'll just share this quickly. There was the I dropped. I may have dropped.
Oh yeah, you're not on the phone anymore.
Oh yeah, you dropped from the call a while ago. Sorry, I thought you knew.
I thought I was just stopping share. Maybe I dropped. But I just to report back that after removing the Rust version flag and compiling with the older version for the older cargo lock, the MSRV tool did determine that 1.71.1 is the MSRV now, which is because of the dependency.
So when you specified it in the TOML file, that actually made it higher?
Yes. Yeah. So I guess that would be a thing to check. I mean, you're not usually going to set it to a value and then find that you're actually good for older, unless you're specifically trying to go and rework your code to work for an older version. Typically, it's going to be newer only, but I guess that's an issue the tool doesn't handle yet, because the compiler itself checks. If you try to use an older compiler before trying to start something, I think it just says,
it fails
no,
immediately.
I'm too old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had another question, like similar to the malicious packages case. Is there something inherently different in Cargo's design compared to, say, NPM or something that makes it more secure? Or is it just that like you don't download like every small one-line function is also a package in NPM? Is there anything more to that, or is it pretty much just that philosophy, design philosophy wise?
Yeah, I don't know of any specific features that make it inherently safer. But yeah, like Rust, well, it's very common to have lots of dependencies in a lot of Rust tools. Yeah, it's a lot less common for those dependencies to basically be one line.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for that reason, maybe there's just a slightly less of a culture of like a package for everything. You know, there's no left pad. Well, there probably is a left pad package. Somebody probably made that. But just
Standard library has a
but probably
To be
nobody.
fair, left part is complicated. But it's built into the standard library right away.
yeah.
I remember there was a lot of discussion about this like a while back, like when I think LiftPad actually happened, because I remember like on the Rust like subreddit, people were talking about like, can Rust also have a LiftPad incident? And I think there was
No, it can't.
a whole bunch of debate. Yeah, like people conclude that no, it can't. I can't remember why.
You could yank it and to be annoying, but you can still install a yank package. Yank just means that the author doesn't want you to install it, but you can still install it.
Right.
And I think that was the reason, because left pad, it was just removed, right? And then
Yeah.
suddenly everything was broken.
100%. It was moved intentionally.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why they have a policy that they mostly don't remove packages with certain, certain cases that are exceptions. But they leave everything there because they're like, we don't really care if it's embarrassing to you or whatever. You can yank it, which tells other people you shouldn't use this, but it's not gone.
You can override it.
You can always get it.
Have they removed like malicious packages though?
Yes, they do.
I
Yes.
think I've read.
I think one of the people from the foundation said that they do in one of the interviews. I should correct myself. I looked into the package a little bit more, and it does have 128 lines in another file that I missed. So it's an implementation from a archive paper. So yeah, I bet it's a legitimate package.
Oh, interesting. Bunbury dropping all the hot links as usual.
For sure. Scoop them at the end.
Yeah, scoop them up and put them in the Meetup text channel.
Yeah. Well, I've kind of been collecting a full list of them, and actually started compiling my own version of Cargo that includes all of these tools.
Oh.
So,
Nice.
yeah, once I get that kind of optimized, I guess, I'll release it. But yeah, for now I'm just kind of playing around with different tools and seeing what works well. But yeah, these are kind of like the best things that I've found to improve your Rust experience. If you haven't seen them already, some of these are pretty popular already. But
Yeah, I've definitely come across binstall before. Yeah, it speeds some stuff up, especially for common binaries. I'm curious to try Cargo Wizard because I tend to set a lot of the same settings over and over again. I'm curious to see if they have a preset that matches what I like doing.
Interesting.
I'm probably going to steal that one too, Cargo Wizard, especially like for some embedded project where you sometimes you need some performance or sometimes you need some extra symbols or something like that. It's good to have those defaults so that you're not wrangling with Cargo Tomo. You're trying to Google for like, oh, what's this YAML option or that YAML.
Yeah.
I've also used like a bunch of options that it's not specifically for compile speed, but you can say make your dependencies compiled to be fast, but your primary binary that you're working with is a debug build. So you still want SERDI to be fast because you're pretty sure SERDI is not broken. But your local application, you're like, well, I'm debugging, so I want my symbols to show up. I want everything to be there. I don't want it optimized out. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. Like Cargo TOML has many options, I will say. So something like Cargo Wizard has has some good presets. So I'm curious to have that. Cargo Expand, Glenbury just put. I've also used that. It's very useful for when you have macros that you're like, wait, how? Like, what did happen here? Cargo Expand takes all your macros and shows you the output after macro expansion. So that one's very good.
It is extremely handy. I've been using it a lot because, like, especially when you're having to do a lot of say, like, I have in some projects a large set of enums that I think there's a crate now that I'm using called like enum dispatch or static dispatch.
Oh, we've been using that a lot too.
Yeah, where it's like instead of having the dynamic dispatch, right, which can have some performance costs, you just use an enum that has all of the variants are implementing some traits.
Yes.
And then you dispatch over that enum. But if you do that manually, it's really annoying because you have to write an enum and implement the trait for it every time.
Right.
Every time you add a variant, you're going to also have to add that implementation. So better to use a macro, but when writing those sorts of macros, even like this derived macros that you might want, or attribute macros, right? Especially when you're writing those sorts of things, they can be so annoying.
Yeah.
Like if one small thing goes wrong, it's not transparent at all. So Cargo Expand really helpful for something like that.
Yeah.
And it has color.
Yes.
All right, cool. We are coming pretty close to time here, but I do have one question that I really wanted to ask. It's my one burning question. So I kind of want to get it out there.
By all means.
So I guess I have to kind of paint a picture here. Like, so my project at work, to avoid like getting into like NDA stuff, basically we're like wrapping different libraries in Rust, and we're augmenting them with some new functionality. But we also want to just be like a drop-in replacement for these libraries. So like if people want to use, people are used to that API, what they can do is they can just like change the import to our crate and just like use the exact same like functions and like data structures and stuff. So that's kind of been our plan there. But we've been running into some problems because like we're wrapping a bunch of different crates that all have that we're augmenting with the same functionality. But every crate, of course, could have a completely different API. We don't know like all the different possible crates that we might end up wrapping, because someone could make a new one, and then we might want to support that one later. So we can't like enumerate them all. And so something that's come up is we have sort of like a global state, like we have caches, like connection pooling, for example. We have like a connection pooling service, and we thought, okay, well, if we want to have this like state, we would just store it in like a static, right? Just have like static caching. And that was working fine at first. But then we started getting into cases where we need to store data structures that are generic. And that's where things started to go off the rails, because you can't have static generics. So I guess the issue there is like, how do we handle this if we need to be able to have like a drop-in replacement to API? Like we could just like manually inject our services around with like an app stuff that just like holds all the caches, like all these like dash maps and stuff. But
I feel like I don't quite understand what problem the global cache is actually trying to fix. Like,
The problem is that if we have to inject these services manually throughout the application, the APIs will then have to add like a new argument to take that like like pseudo global state, that app or whatever that holds the services, which would mean we have to that the end user now has to like make modifications of their application. It's not just like a drop-in replacement. They can't just like change the imports of the use statements,
oh, I see.
which is what we ideally would like, but
What did the statics hold?
the statics hold basically dash maps, so just like concurrent hash maps. But the value that is being stored is generic, or at least we want it to be generic. We ended up just making it like box dine any, I think, to try and work around that. I feel like this is the kind of case where that's sort of where that kind of escape hatch is maybe necessary, but it's kind of ugly. So it's either
I was
we
gonna say, I think that's generally the advice I've seen is you have to put it in a box.
yeah. The thing is, it's also dine any though, which is kind of like it's like dynamic typing stuff, which is not exactly ideal. I mean,
Yeah.
it's fine, but now we have to add this like as mute any like method to our like traits, and it's kind of not really doing a whole lot, which is it kind of pollutes a lot of our traits, which is annoying.
Before the generic issue, like how did the end user like use the original crate versus your version? Like how did the end user end up using your crate versus like the crate that your crate wrapped around?
They just I don't know what you mean. Like they just used the APIs exactly as.
Oh, okay. So it's exactly the same name, just you.
Yeah, what we've done
imported.
is we have the exact same names for all the structs and all the functions. It's just that the module you import them from is our crates module instead. So
Okay,
you just
so-
like replace the use statements.
I see. That's all they need to do.
Yeah, or at least that was the idea. We've also been considering the other option of just saying, okay, well, we can't promise this drop-in replacement at all, and just drop the statics entirely and just use manual dependency injection. The end user now has to pass around like this state, so they'll have like a builder at the beginning that they can use to construct everything. Pass that around, which does generally seem a little bit more, I guess, rusty, because you see a lot of libraries that do this like builder thing, like Clap, for example. But like, it does kind of break that initial promise of completely drop-in replacement of the API.
Is there some way to, I hate to suggest it, to use a macro to work around storing a generic?
Macro.
Might not be drop-in also.
I don't know how we would do that.
or even I was thinking to use a macro as well, but like, why not use a macro to hide away creating such a global state builder? So yeah, it's not drop in once, but if you add such a macro in, and then it's defined on your side, like the package side, if you have to add another thing that you want to wrap, then you can just change such a builder macro to include it depending on a use or something like that.
This static, do the users of the crate interact with it directly, or is it something?
No, it's hidden from them. It's internal to because the libraries that we're wrapping, they don't have any kind of like connection pooling capabilities. Like our wrapper, it extends their capabilities to add this.
One
connection
thing
pooling.
you could potentially do is like add some sort of extension trait where like you basically implement the trait which extends the original crate and like add the additional features there, and the user, along with importing the original struct, they also import the trait which then adds all those additional features whatever you're adding.
Like you're just trying to specify the type for this static, but you can't use a generic because you don't know what it is. But generics are compile time, so you can't do that, which is where you ended up in the dyn ending, right?
Yeah. Well, basically, yeah, we can't. Like you can't declare like a static hash map with generic fields.
T,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
because you don't know the size. So
Right.
statics, you have to know all the size.
yeah.
Um,
Like the type that we're like the compile time type that we're passing through is dependent on which library we're wrapping. So the library that we're wrapping determines what that T is basically that we're storing.
Right.
And then we have to like convert back.
Like, should you maybe implement it multiple times for the different
That's what I
types
was
that you
thinking.
expect to be used?
Yeah, that's literally what I was
I
thinking.
know that's maybe not ideal
Why is it
for
not ideal?
customers, but
The
that
customers
might
don't
be
see
the
it. So my
yeah.
question to finish Bunbury's idea is, are you using compile like feature flags to enable the different wrapped libraries, or how are you doing which one are you wrapping?
So we're not doing that. We have basically a core crate, and then we have like separate crates for each API
Ah, okay,
that depend on that core crate.
I see.
And I don't even know if this is like the optimal approach, but like this is
Yeah, well, if you do that, then you could still do the same thing where you have feature flags. Okay, so there's one problem with what I'm going to say. I'll point to the problem first before I say what I'm going to say. The problem with this is that you have to then pick which one takes priority if more than one of the flags is enabled. But let's just ignore that problem for 1 second. What you do is you have feature flags that compile a different static type depending on which feature flags are enabled, because you never have a generic involved. So therefore, you can do it because you just have a conditional compilation step where you say, if this flag is enabled, compile it this way. If this one is enabled, blah, blah, blah. The challenge comes in where somebody enables more than one. Then you have to decide which one do you ignore, so to speak. That's what I've done,
Well,
at least. That's what worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, do you need to have like only one single
Well, it can
hash
only
map?
be one type.
Or could you actually have
Oh, okay.
like just like different hash maps for
Right.
different types?
Well, that's the thing, though. We don't necessarily know ahead of time like which libraries are going to be used. I don't know.
Libraries as in plural.
Because I mean, for the customer's code, like they're going to like, you know, when they're doing their implementation, they're going to choose a type, and that's going to stay stable, you know, for their program going forward. Right? You're not just going to randomly change types.
You said,
you know, from
you said
yeah.
libraries. Are you wrapping more than one at a time?
No, not more than one at a time.
Okay. So definitely the feature flag thing could work.
Yeah, it would also be interesting because it's presumably just set up in one of your source files, and whoever uses it, like there has to be a type for that particular instance, but in each application, there's only one type. So if it is possible to derive it from a macro or something.
You don't need a macro. The feature flags thing is really, because the nice thing about the feature flags thing is, quote unquote, some of the code disappears, right? All the code doesn't is not active at the same time. Therefore, you can use the same variable name, and the type of the variable just depends on which feature flag was enabled, which determines what it would compile as. In a lot of cases where I don't expect more than one to be on, I don't choose a default. I just give a compile error. You can tell it to give a nice compile error saying that you have more than one on, something like that. There's a way to do that. I should be able to find it if you want. But That way, you never need to worry about having generics, because when you in your downstream crates, but they just enable feature flag when they using the core as a dependency, and that would enable the correct type for them for the one that's dependent on the core.
So the challenge, and yeah, correct me if
Yeah, go ahead.
if this isn't the use case, but I think I heard the use case is that this library doesn't know what the types are ahead of time, and so a feature flag isn't necessarily a solution. Because
That's
it could be,
right.
could be anything. If you give me
Yeah.
the library, I might put my own type in it, and you have no idea what that's going to be.
Right. Do you know who your consumers are? That's the correct question. So I assume you knew all the downstream crates. You just don't know which one is going to be enabled. But
You don't know all the downstream crates,
you
and
don't.
others could be added. Like someone else could make another downstream crate.
Someone not you. Someone who's not you. You don't have control over who the people are consuming your core are.
I mean, I guess we would have control over that, but like we don't know what libraries.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Like you can add more as you go. It's just a matter of, are you in a position to say, for each one that's going to depend on me, I would implement a feature flag for them.
I guess we could do that. It's a little bit ugly because it's like we have this core crate that's generally like agnostic of the downstream dependencies within.
It might,
Yes, we
would
will.
that introduce a circular dependency if like this core crate had to know the types of the crates that depend on it?
Then the types would become part of the core. That's what I did in mine. But the types only exist when that feature flag is enabled.
Yeah, that works really well when there's a limited,
Right. It does.
typically no sets. Like I would agree that if you have the amount of control where you can do that, having a set of features is a nice way of doing it. Yeah, it sounds like what you'd really like to do is inject a type from like the thing that's depending on you.
Yeah. Like we store that type and then we like do some stuff, some work with it, and then eventually we have to like pass it back to the crate that we're wrapping.
Right.
And that's why we have to do this like box-dine any translation. So we like cast it to a box-dine any, and then we have to like downcast it back to what it was originally.
Yeah. So I mean, like especially if the primary thing you're doing is storage, I mean the downcasting is a relatively good way of doing it because it actually kind of matches what you would do in C or C++, where you just say, I don't care what this is, I just got a bunch of pointers.
Yeah.
And I keep the thing in a pointer and whatever, I'm gonna give it back to you. But
yeah, we don't really like do much with that. So it's yeah, it does make sense. Like it's safe to do like a box-dine any here.
Yeah. So if you're not doing a lot of computation on the value itself, which any dine traits can be kind of expensive there. But I think if you're mostly just storing it in a way where you're like, well, I want to own this for a while. I don't know what the type is, so it's an any. But you also don't really care what the type is.
Yeah.
The downcasting, especially if the downcast is always to the same type.
It is always back to the same type. So I was also thinking like unsafe mem transmute could also technically work, but
yeah. Downcasting.
Well,
nicer. Yeah, downcasting is nicer.
Yeah.
Or you could like serialize it, store it in the map, and then deserialize as well, potentially. But maybe
That's also
It's
expensive.
going to have a lot of overhead versus, like, I think under the hood, the downcast, like it basically.
I think it's like the cleanest option.
Yeah, I think it does like a lookup on a V table, and that's all statically compiled in. So like
Out of all the options, that definitely sounds the cheapest.
yeah,
Like you're storing just quick table lookup, the pointer to the table, and
Mem transmute might be cheaper, I think.
and it's closer to what you would
Mem
see,
transmute is cheaper than throwing away safety, but this is a Rust meetup, not a C++ meetup.
I mean, if you're just storing it, theoretically, it should just be safe, right? You're not doing any extra work on it.
Yeah, that's.
Right.
I mean, that is the thing.
So if you can guarantee safety despite like unsafe, like okay, yeah, unsafe min tragedy is in the name.
Unless
You can guarantee safety technically, you know.
unless you have two downstream crates in the same other crate, and then now they end up somehow sharing that static space and break things.
Okay. Right.
You know,
I mean, another thing that you could consider, and this is getting maybe a bit hacky, so take it with a grain of salt. But if you want it to be, if you want it to work downstream, and you've got a type that needs to be injected, like you could kind of consider a build RS style declaration somewhere that lets you set that type. Where you'd probably have to pair it with like a macro so that like the downstream crate would have to use build RS, expand some kind of macro to figure out like what the type it should be putting in there is, and then it expands to a new source file that just gets injected into the dependency. That just you only declare your static in the downstream dependency after it knows the type, but that's kind of magical. It's probably easier to either just use a macro or make somebody declare a type and a static, and you have like you could probably declare like a const expression function that sets up your static.
It does sound to me that a lot of the issues that we're running into just thinking about it, it comes a lot from your restrictions saying that you want it to be a very strict drop-in replacement.
Yeah, so we actually, okay, so yeah, about that. So we did actually talk this over as a team, and we kind of decided, well, another issue with the statics is just like, what if we have to store more generics in these statics? Because we ended up having a lot of statics to try and maintain state. And so we've kind of started leaning towards just getting rid of the statics entirely and just working more with generics. So it seems like it's a lot friendlier to how Rust likes things done anyway. And just not make that promise. Like it's a mostly drop-in replacement, but you're gonna have to like thread around a little bit of state, and hopefully that's okay. Right? Like it seems like people in the Rust community generally tend to be more okay with like threading stuff around anyhow, because they don't really have like dependency injection frameworks like like Spring Boot or whatever. But I don't know, just felt like maybe that might be
another option to consider, especially if you're throwing architectural options around, is something like the tower architecture, where you have like repeated layers of the same trait in towers of service, I think. And one of those layers could implement caching, and then you're defining that on the downstream types, so you actually know at the type construction time like what the end type actually is, because the cache doesn't know in a cache, but by the time you make it a concrete type, like then cache would be that same type. If that makes sense.
I don't know tower.
Oh, so tower has got a trait. I think it's called service, and basically it lets you implement like arbitrary logic where at each layer, like you input and output the same type, so you can like type stack a whole bunch of these different services. So like the lowest level one could be do HTTP requests. The next level one could be cache. And then the top level one is some specific thing you're trying to.
You have like a link or something?
Yeah, I mean, the tower service trait is pretty famous. You should be able to get it from any AI. Just Google it. They should be able to explain it to you. And probably see how they could adapt it for your case.
Tower crate.
Tower
yeah,
crate.
it's called tower. I think it's part of Tokayo. I think it came from Tokayo.
Oh, this.
Yeah, service.
the service trait.
Yeah, that looks like it.
Yeah.
But a lot of the web frameworks do the same thing, right? It's not just Arctic system does something similar, Rama does something similar.
Yeah, this is just a famous example here, but yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
in a concrete type, now, I mean, it looks like they're using its request response, request result, but so yeah, the intention here is that you know, you've got this kind of stack of the service traits, and you know, because it's always a response and a request, you can chain all the request responses together, and like you can have one in the middle that's like a caching one. So you know, it'll check a cache, and then it doesn't even call the underlying one. For example, like you define the implementation of what call actually means. Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to dig into this a little bit more.
Yeah. But this avoids the kind of question you're talking about, because Tower, there's a whole bunch of different plugins, and they all take in a service, and so you can just say, well, I define it for whatever end use application I want, but because it's all generics, that you have to eventually declare this type in your crate. It's always a concrete type by the time it gets to the end, and so they can do caching on like arbitrary objects because they don't actually initialize the cache. You do. They just make it really nice by having a singular trait.
Mm. We do have like we are using some associated types to like push like some kind of inner type up already.
I mean, is there something stopping you from just using like a vec of like with a capacity, like preset capacity for whatever type is required, or just giving the user, 64 bits to work with, and they can store whatever they want in that 64 bits?
I don't. We don't really know how large that object is that we're going to be storing, because it's entirely dependent on the.
I mean, if you box it, its size is pretty knowable, but
I
I'm not sure
think
that
you're
solves
talking
your
about
problem.
the vec with capacity, but
No, even if no matter what size it is, once you put it in a box, then the size becomes a pointer, right?
Yep.
But
Yeah.
I was more thinking, does that solve your problem? Because I think your real problem was the generics, right? The lack of being able to use generics.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think that solves your problem.
I think you'd still have to call the like any downcast kind of thing there, because you still have to declare what goes into that box.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can fill the generic argument for the box with just not specifying it, even though you know that it's a pointer, because the rest of Rust won't care. Like from a memory perspective, it's okay, but then Rust doesn't know what methods you can call on it, so you still have to have like any downcasts in there as well.
yeah, well, I mean, you don't necessarily need to use a generic. You can just like, give your
Transmute it.
users an array of 64 bits or 32 bits or whatever.
Well, but then you've probably also just thrown away most of the type safety, right?
Not most, all.
All
You have no type.
except for the happenstance when you happen to actually be storing an integer type.
Yeah, I mean, you could create a custom smart pointer, and just store the type alongside your.
I'm actually curious. So, I think you said that they might have many more libraries wrapped in the future, but
Yeah.
is it a problem for you all to add conditional code for new libraries that are added? It's not a whole bunch of code.
Like basically like the featured flag idea that you had earlier.
That one, yeah. I'm just trying to establish, is that actually even viable? I know it's not necessarily the nicest, but is it viable at all?
Maybe. I don't know. That's something I have to like
Think through.
which is like requirements, like something to talk to the team about, I think.
Because these downstream crates, and you're not in control of them, correct?
Yeah, we don't own the downstream crates that we're wrapping, at least.
Okay.
We're just augmenting them with a specific set of behaviors.
Okay.
Circling back to the macro idea, is it possible for the downstream crates, if they were to use a macro, that the idea behind the macro would be to actually move the type declaration into the dependent crate and also the static allocation? So I was curious if they would be able to say like create cache with the type T, and then the macro behind the scenes would go create whatever data structures and implementation, and then also define a static there. So it would effectively just live once there and would be a concrete type.
Oh, so like move the statics to the actual downstream crates.
For the actual, yeah, I've seen that done for types in the embedded world sometimes. Where they say we don't actually know what your pin configuration or everything will be, but if you give us these arguments in a macro, we'll actually just fill in the data structure right there, kind of inline in your crate, and then you can use it wherever you need.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Not sure though how that relates to the everything else in the picture.
Yeah, like I mean, I guess the only requirement is that, or like the reason why we're making a static is because like we want to make sure that it's only constructed like once. Like we only have the one like connection pool. If we have like multiple connections, they have to like share the same sort of state. So
Same pool, right?
And you said that the statics don't allow generics.
yeah,
Okay. Where do you get that error message when you try to do the generic?
the error message comes from trying to declare the static.
When you try to declare it, it says that thing, and if you try to put it in a once lock, it still would complain.
Well,
right?
yeah, we did put it in a
A once lock.
we put in a lazy lock. And
Okay, same thing. Yeah. When I say same thing, I mean same effectively.
Yeah.
And then when you put that the type of the lazy lock as generic, then it complains.
well, yeah, because
Yeah.
there's no T. We
The-
can't declare a T.
Size. The rule I think is the same for constants, that it always has to be fully specified at compile time.
It's the same reason why the atomics don't have a generic atomic type, right?
Okay. Yeah, that all makes sense. That's unfortunate. I've always had the type available, so I've never had to try to use a generic. So I was just now reasoning through what have I done before. But
Yeah.
okay.
Is there a reason why you're like taking all of, because it sounds to me right now like you're that you have like so many upstream downstream crates or types that come from either side and trying to conglomerate them in a really really large dash map. But is there a reason why like they have to be stored together? You can create like a static state for each one, like a separate one, depending on what you have or don't have.
We do have a lot of static maps. It's just
Because I wonder if it is a problem of the hash map itself, like when you're creating such a large structure that contains multiple unknown internal structures that you can't know the size. Well, why not split them up? If you're able to have many different statics and each static has its own type, then you don't have to worry about where they.
Well, that's the
come
thing. We
together
don't know the
combined.
types for each of those statics.
But it's
up front.
Yeah, the real problem is that the types are not known at all.
Enumerate. Yeah, we can't
Until-
enumerate that.
But not just can't enumerate it. You don't have any idea what it could be because the types are going to be supplied by the calling crate. So
Yeah, the library that we want to wrap. So if someone makes a new library, they can
actually,
define their
then-
own type. We don't know what that type is.
then that goes into different things, like whether or not it's your responsibility to, as the upstream crate, to like, why would it be your responsibility to manage what the downstream crate has for state, for example?
We don't really, but that's what. So we our static stuff is, that's our own state. We call into like our I guess our downstream crates that depend or that wrap these other libraries will I guess call into their methods to like get certain results back. But we still want to expose like the exact same API. So yeah, we have to. So we end up like casting stuff back.
Yeah.
It's just so complicated.
of all the options you've explained, the least bad one is the dine any, which is not.
Yeah. And it is kind of the application that Dine Any is intended for too.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what I was thinking, because it's like it is an escape hatch. So
Yeah.
like it's clearly meant for some use case, and this kind of feels like this is getting into that kind of territory.
I think it is. Yeah.
where it would be reasonable to just use a dine any.
At least for me, I feel like I don't know enough. I feel like having the details that you would have on the inside, like you can consider things like how in an actual use case, right? Like if you have a client who's using your crate, what kind of type safety is necessary or not necessary for you to know about, and what kinds of things that you would want to have or to be able to account for in your own crate versus like if somebody else, because a drop-in replacement is not always necessarily a good thing, right? Like that if the client has some code that they're writing, just generally speaking, that they don't have to think of, like they don't have to think about this thing as just magically there, then that means that you're not checking it, right, to make sure that it's working with whatever you're writing. And so there's some responsibilities that I feel like at the very least should be delegated to, or have to be delegated to the user of the crate. That if you're holding somebody else's flowers, if you're holding somebody else's state, it could be dangerous for them even.
Yeah. Like I think the current approach that we've been pursuing is just like, yeah, the user can construct this state, and we just have like, we kind of wanted it to be like a singleton, so we're just gonna have like an atomic boolean to make sure that it's initialized once, and then the user can just like pass this state around. And they'll have to throw it through their program themselves. Like it's still mostly drop-in replacement. It's just the reason the reason for the drop-in replacement requirement obviously is just driving adoption, right? If you're already using this crate and you want this extra functionality that we've added, like the connection pooling, then it's a lot easier to pick up our crate if you don't have to do any additional work other than just like do like a find replace on your imports. So it's mostly just about the business case of drive adoption.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense.
It's tough.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I mean, the I guess, right thing, the more rusty thing to do is just not use these statics, but like,
Yeah.
but the business case says it would be nicer otherwise. And that's why we're like, can we have our cake and eat it too? And we've thought of a lot of different ways to slice this problem. And nothing really great came up, but Boxstein any seemed like maybe the cleanest option if we absolutely had to stick to it. But since we've now decided that we don't have to be strictly tied or like married to that, to the static caching, I don't know. Like, I think using the generics is probably fine now.
I'd check out the tower stuff. At the very least, it might be a design pattern that you might want to adopt.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to take a look at that because that sounds maybe useful.
Oh, I'm gonna look at this later. it looks very generally applicable. I'm like pretty.
It's a very interesting way of constructing the problem, and like it comes from like Tokyo, which of course does a lot of stuff with other people's futures.
Yeah.
Right. So like the entirety of the internals of Tokyo like doesn't really care what the futures do or what they contain, but it does have to hold them, which at least superficially sounds kind of like case. And Tower specifically was to solve the problem is that people were like, I don't know, take caching as a good example.
Yeah.
Where like tons of applications need caching. And like, how do you not have to re-implement caching everywhere? Basically with just like a tiny bit of change in logic for like different types or whatever.
Yeah.
And Tower was the solution to that, which is just, it's called that because it's a stack of these service things that form a chain.
You got a really big tower of services that are connected to each other.
Yeah, and the idea is that you can just stick which services you want in there. So if one of them is a caching service, that's great. But there can be other things like, authentication mechanisms or that, like if you're doing remote requests, you may have to do this on all kinds of different services, like from like a microservice type endpoint thing, where you want one expert team to write your authentication logic, but then you've got to spread it over 50 different services. And you're like, how do I make this easy for people to use? You just use this type, stick it in the middle of your service stack somewhere. And then it does what's needed.
Yeah, I see. Actually, yes, that's an interesting way of thinking about this.
It's a little bit more like servicey, which hence the type name.
Yeah.
You may be able to use a similar kind of idea with the stacking thing if you can get your users to declare a type, and then inside the type for your static cache, maybe don't make it static, but if it can live within that type of something, like an associated value with that class or the struct type.
This is what I was saying earlier with this, because it feels a lot to me very much like if you work with a lot of embedded stuff, a lot of times you have to call initialization macros, right, on the board or something like that. But this is provided by the whoever made the HAL or the crate, right? And somebody's like,
the ergonomics are very dependent on how you have your users set up stuff. So I don't know. In your case, it might be really easy. It might not be. Without looking at code, I can't tell you.
I have the code right here, and I could show it, but
I gotta get going.
No, it's not. It's AOD against NDA, so.
All right.
Sounds like an interesting problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you can like construct like a generic kind of example of what you're talking about, and and just like drop it in the Discord service or in the Discord server.
Yeah, I could.
People may
probably do
may
something.
independently want to have a crack at it, just as a rough challenge.
Yeah, I have no challenges in my life.
I was trying to get my coworker, who's a little bit more familiar with the problem, in here as well to talk about it, but he couldn't make it today. So
Unfortunately,
I'll probably try to poke his brain a little bit more tomorrow see if we can come up with something to like just post from like the Discord or something and get people to give it a try, give it a whack.
What you could probably try to do is do like an MRE, just like a thing with a static, probably just with an integer or whatever. And then another crate, that downstream crate uses a string in there or something. Just, something trivial so that you can reproduce
Oh, I was
the
thinking we could just,
bones.
yeah, we could just use like, okay, well,
Yeah, just something to reproduce the bones of the problem. So you can, like, people can play with it and actually send back alternative approaches. Because the approach with the compile, the thing I suggested, the biggest problem with that is that it would require the downstream clients to create two crates, because you cannot have circular dependencies, as Kevin was pointing out. So you cannot depend on their crate. So for the flag being enabled, you'd have to depend on a third crate that would have the types in it, which was fine for me because I had a third crate already available. But seeing as how you don't, and it also means that for each downstream client, they must create a PR to add a flag for themselves. So it's not without maintenance. But it compiles nicely and it works. There is that,
I'll go poke my coworker tomorrow. We'll try and figure out
It'd
something.
be interesting to know more details about it, or
Something a little more concrete, I guess, would help.
or even like the generic version of the example. I would take a crack at something like that too. Just to be like, even as like a training exercise or like a practice.
I won't give you false hope. I won't be trying.
That's fine. I mean, I think we've already kind of settled on what we are going to do. But yeah, I mean, like it sounds like some people might be interested in.
Yeah. I mean, it is an interesting problem.
And it is a real world problem. It did actually happen.
Well, it happens only to you. But okay, yeah, sure, it's a real problem.
Well, he's real. He's a real person. He's got a real
He
problem.
is. But,
I mean, in case you are not looking for toy examples, I feel like a lot of real world problems are like that, though, right? They're very specific, niche edge cases.
It's a good thing we went to yours and not mine, because mine was super simple compared to yours. Mine just add one extra line and problem's gone away because all the types are well defined and everything is ready up front,
Anyway, yeah, it's getting late. We should probably get going. So
I think it's gotten late.
If anyone wants to do a talk as usual, yeah, let me know. I can slot you in for next month. Otherwise, I think we're probably just going to have a free discussion.
Yeah, I'll keep my puzzle handy for next time.
Yeah. I may or may not be around next time. I seem to be going in for surgery to cut cancer off my skin every 6 months. So I think I'm going in like 2 days before the next meetup. So.
All right, bro. Best of luck.
Yeah, best of luck.
It's not a big deal. It's the friendliest cancer there is.
Yeah,
need to cut it off, and I'm good.
Okay. Sure.
We'll go with that. But yeah, anyway, like if anyone has a talk that they want to do, then, yeah, feel free, jump in, give me a holler on Discord or through Meetup, and we'll try to slot you in.
Yeah, or come up with another example that we can discuss. Real world examples.
Yeah, or we could do more lifetime puzzles. I don't know.
The puzzle's not that hard. It's gonna take like 5 minutes. It's not a big deal. It's more like
maybe I can get more details on this issue for you guys, and then we can.
Sure. Yeah. It's more like my puzzle was more of a thing that one thing that looks very similar to another thing. One works and one doesn't, kind of thing. And I was just like, oh, okay. And then I thought I got a solution, which Rust Analyzer also thought I got a solution until they could see the full code and there were no more errors. And it's like, no, bro, this isn't a solution. Stop. I was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry.
All right. I'm going to end the call now then.
Yes. All right. Good night.
Yeah.
Bye.
Cool.
Come
Nice.
on.
Thanks again, Jonathan and Chester. And setting this
Yeah,
all up.
and Aaron as well. It was a good talk.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Chat with you guys again soon, hopefully. And yeah, we'll see you on the Discord server.
All righty. Bye. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
All right, take care.